before we even talk about our project and actually start going through the tunes, let's talk a little bit, and we have talked about recording process and actually have gone through some of the songs, actually I think almost all the songs that you've recorded in our contributor portion of bluesharmonica.com. But let's talk about the recording studio in general. So when you go in the studio, what's kind of your normal way of recording, setting up? Maybe let's start with the setup. How do you like to walk in the door and figure out how you're going to get your sound, your amplified sound in the studio?
Well, unless I'm doing overdubs and I'm there by myself, it's usually the last thing that they get around to, because it takes the longest to get the drums, and then they get stuck on something's not recorded. I hear a buzz in the bass, so they get around to the harmonica last, usually. Unless you're, like I said, you're doing overdubs. So let's pretend I'm doing an overdub.
Okay.
I go...
And for the student, an overdub is?
An overdub is like a blank space that you left in between singing verses, for example, that you're going to try to insert a improvised or worked out solo, or maybe you had a little special harmony piece worked out for that section. So you go back in the studio and on a blank simultaneous track you record over what the band has already played. You knew that.
Thanks. All right, so you go in.
So I go in. I've had pretty great difficulty in assessing or in getting the recorded tone to sound like the live tone. I've had a lot of engineers that had a big difficulty recording the distortion and the uniqueness of harmonicas. So usually I like to have a little chat with the engineer first and tell him, think of this as just another distorted guitar. Don't do anything that you wouldn't do to just a guy playing a solo. You don't have to compress it or anything. To get the sound, what I like to do is I like to use multiple amps and maybe in multiple rooms so that they don't leak into each other at all, and you can truly, when it comes to mixing time, you can truly put a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And I've done that. That's big fun. That's real fun. So in one room you have a champ amp or a little tiny Masco, 5-10 watt amp, really balls to the wall, but since you're not in the same room, you're not getting feedback. Mm-hmm. You're going to be in the next room looking at it through a glass window with a little microphone on it. So then I like to get my main sound, my main amp set up. It's better not to bring a lot of guys record with bassmans. To get a bassman in the studio, to get the real huevos, you got to turn it up pretty loud, So if that's okay with everybody, then bring the bassman, or I would say bring some other choices, some other options that you might have or could borrow, because in the studio you can crank it up to where it's real distorted and rough sounding, but you're not trying to fill a nightclub with that sound. You're only trying to get that sound in a microphone that's a few inches away from the speaker.
So you might use a Princeton with one 10-inch speaker instead of a Bassman with 4 10-inch speakers?
Exactly. Well, you might use both. You might use a Princeton or a Champ amp or a Deluxe, and you might use Sonny Junior Cruncher. It's a great recording amp in that smaller than a Bassman style. Mm-hmm. It's a few watts less, different speaker configuration. So those two mics, the mic in the other room with the little crunchy and your main amp, and then also what sometimes works real cool and sometimes doesn't, it sounds like a mistake, is I like to hang an ambient mic in the middle of the room, horizontally and vertically, or right about in the middle. So if that's too loud, then maybe put it up in the corner, and what you hear when you play that back is kind of goofy sounding. You know, you just kind of hear this little echoey sound of the solo that you just played, but when you mix them all together, sometimes it comes out sounding really, really cool. I don't want to blow my own horn, but the tone that I really like, that I tried that experiment on, was on the Mountaintop West Coast Blues thing with Paris Slim and Walter Shufflesworth and Johnny Ace and me. That was Walter's idea to set up ambient mic. And I really think I got a really nice chess reverbish type of sound with that setup on that record. But it's difficult. It's hard. It's a lot of variables, you know. I had a real hard time making the record up the line because I really didn't have an arsenal of amps at the time, and I really was just kind of getting into the basement. So that one came out with tones different than I thought I wanted, you know, that I thought I was hearing. So that's an example of what I was saying before. The last record that I made for Mountaintop, the tribute to Mr. Baker, we used a bunch of different amps. We just got all the amps we could get together. I had a Brown Tolex 3-speaker Bandmaster that was on a good portion of that record. Really had it. It had some terrible speakers in it, but it worked. It just made it really unique. And I used Bassman's, original 50s Bassman's that belonged to a fellow named Steve Crawford. And I used a Princeton that belonged to the record producer. And I used my own reissue Bassman on a few tracks. So that's what I do when I first get in the studio. I try and capture what I'm hearing or what the amp is sounding like. Not too much reflection off the walls. It's hard to get it where it really sounds right.